Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us here on Twist Gaming, coming to you live on Twitch at Origins Game Fair 2017 in lovely Columbus, Ohio. My name is Anne. I am joined tonight with my co-host,
Nicole,
as well as
Gil Hova from Formal Ferret Games.
Awesome. Gil, we were talking a little bit earlier about some new cool stuff that Formal Ferret Games has coming out, and do you want to share a little bit with our viewers about that?
Sure, it's two games that are, one's coming out now and one's going to be on Kickstarter in August. The first one is Wordsy, that comes out in August. The Kickstarter was last year, and it's a word game that doesn't play like other word games, which is part of its appeal. So it's a word game that rewards longer words. So you get 8 letters out on the board, and when you come up with a word, you can add as many letters as you'd like. So you're not limited to the letters that are on the board. So you can those 2-letter words in Scrabble are useless in this game, which I think makes it feel a whole lot better. So it's been very popular at this show. I sold out of my copies on Friday, which is great. It took me 2 days, which is fantastic. And, I brought a decent number of copies, too, which is nice.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. So I say that just as it's been a really popular game, and it's getting a lot of support, which I'm super excited about. So that's going to be in stores in August. That should be in your local or online game store. The other one, which most people are probably really curious to hear about, is Wordsy. Not Wordsy. I just talked about Wordsy. I just woke up from a nap, so please excuse me. A little loopy. The second game that people are more excited that our people really want to hear about is the Networks expansion. It's called the Networks Executives. So if you're familiar with the Networks, it's a strategy game where you are a TV network executive. You're just taking over a struggling TV network. You start the game with a little bit of cash and 3 terrible TV shows. You're trying to get the most viewers over 5 seasons. This has been a very popular game. It's in its 3rd printing now, and it's doing really, really well. So this expansion is going to be on Kickstarter in August, which means it's going to get shipped middle of 2018, most likely. And in this version of the game, we have executives. So the players get 2 cards at the start of the game, and each card gives you a little power in the game, but also gives you a weakness. Like, for example, you could be Mr. or Ms. Beeb, in that case, you're a state-run TV network, so like the BBC. So you get a lot of money in it, but your actions are now constrained. In the base game, you can choose 1 of 5 actions, but if you are Mr. or Ms. Beeb, you have to use a rondelle to choose your actions. So you may have to spend money if you really want to do this particular action. So you get a lot of money, but you got to spend a lot of money also.
Okay.
You can also be Mr. or Ms. Flicks, which means that you are now a streaming network, and you're no longer bound to 8 p.m., 9 p.m., or 10 p.m. shows, but you now have to make sure that you don't change genre in a slot, otherwise you lose viewers. And then there's another one, Mr. or Ms. Telethon, which means you can no longer have ads on your network, but you can get money by holding telethons and asking the other players for money. So it continues the base game's tradition of being very thematic, really interesting and fun, and there being a solid game underneath, a really fun game. So that's what got the game popular, but it adds a lot of replayability, because every time you play the game, it's going to be something completely different.
That is super cool. I've heard so much buzz around the network, and that it was such a great game and so much fun to play, especially after BGG-Con. That was when I was trying to think which one was it? Which one was it? There was a lot of people really loved the game there, so I'm sure that there's a lot of excitement for the expansion.
Yeah, there is.
Do you have any stretch goal? I mean, I know this is very early days for a Kickstarter far down, but do you have any stretch goals planned in mind? Things that you would like to add to the game expansion?
So far, we have the big stretch goal that I'm planning on are 2 extra executives that are just a little bit crazier than what's going to come in the regular expansion box. So there's one executive that's a time traveler. So they can take extra turns because they're going back in time, but every time they do that, they leave an anomaly that you put in the star deck, and someone else can pick up the anomaly, and they can have 2 extra turns as well, or 1 extra turn as well.
So thematic.
Yeah. And then there's another one that I believe the second one, and don't quote me on this, is going to be a gorilla. So that's the 800-pound gorilla that can sit wherever it wants. So it gets a huge number of advantages, like it gets either extra money or a star at the start of each round. And I think in some games it gets a VP boost also. It gets a viewers boost also. But it must always go last in turn order. And in this game, turn order is very, very, very important.
Explain to me, because I'm not quite sure, what is the importance of turn order?
For
the game.
This is a drafting game. Mm-hmm. So there's cards, there's show stars and ads are laid out face up, and once somebody takes something, it's gone.
It's gone.
So that's why turn order is very important. And turn order is determined by fewest viewers. So the player with fewest viewers will go first. Okay. So players who rush out to an early lead are going to have a slight disadvantage because they won't have access to the cards that they may need. So that tends to balance things out. It's an interesting thing because halfway through the game, sometimes there's a leader who's pretty far ahead, and by the end of the game, their lead usually narrows considerably to the point that a lot of times they don't lead wire to wire. Mm-hmm. Somebody else just overtakes them at the end, which makes it a very dramatic game.
So it sounds like you've put a lot of effort into making sure it's very balanced.
I mean, I've made it fair. Balance is sort of like a thing with game design where if you balance things too much, the game gets kind of boring and stale. You know, you want it to have some surprises and drama in it as well. So, but I have put a lot of effort in making it fair and making it not feel like if you lose, you know why you lost. It's not, and you know what you did more specifically that you lost, and it wasn't just a matter of, well, this card came out and screwed me, you know.
Feeling like you're behind and there's nothing you can do to catch up is probably the worst feeling.
Yeah, it's annoying. On the other hand, you know, as a designer, I also have to make sure if somebody plays a much better game than everyone else, you have to make sure that player wins, you know, because if you balance it too much, you get the sort of all roads lead to Rome thing where no matter what people do, if it comes down to a close game at the end, while that sounds cool on paper, after a while people are like, wait a second, it doesn't matter what I do in the first 75% of the game. So it's
Never
really
thought about it that way.
It's an important balance to hit, you know. So like if somebody does really bad in a game, they kind of have to be far behind, even though it's not that much fun, in order to really be like a competitive game. It's got to do that, you know.
So you're balancing that thought process while you're balancing.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't be too far on one end, but it can't be too far on the other. You know, it's got to feel right, but it's got to feel fair. Pretty much, it's, you know, it goes to games as feedback systems. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when you play a game, you're working towards a goal, but you have to get instant feedback every time you perform an action to know how much further that got you towards your goal. And if you don't get that feedback, then the game is not as interesting, you know. So this is one of the reasons why I love being on Ludology now. You know, I love looking at games from this analytical point of view because I think it's really super rewarding to look at games this way.
You said Ludology?
Yes.
What is that?
Ludology is a podcast started by my friend Jeff Engelstein and his friend Ryan Sturm. I think they started back in 2011. And after about 4 years, Ryan left the show. I believe he was pursuing an advanced degree in teaching. So he needed to devote more time to his studies, so he had to leave. And Jeff tapped Mike Fitzgerald to be his co-host. Mike Fitzgerald is a really great game designer, has been and has been for a long time. He designed the Mystery Rummy series. His most recent designs are Baseball Highlights 2045. Okay. He's got a bunch of other design credits all over the place. He had a collectible card game called Wyvern. He worked a lot on the Pokemon game. He's been in the industry forever. So he was host on Ludology for 2 years, and he brought a different perspective than Ryan. You know, whereas Ryan I don't believe Ryan had any design credits. He was a very enthusiastic fan of games, and he looked at games from an educational point of view. Mike brought a veteran's perspective. Mike is friends with Richard Garfield, so he's very influenced by Richard Garfield's thoughts on game design. So he was a really good perspective on how on how Richard designs game and how Mike designs games. But Mike stepped down a few months ago. He decided he said all he needed to say, and he wanted to focus more on his games. And Jeff tapped me to be the third co-host of Ludology, which I was really excited about.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. So I started about a month ago, and has it been a month? No, it's been 2 months because it's been 3 episodes. And it's been a lot of fun. The very first episode we did we actually went all the way back to the very first episode of Ludology, where Jeff and Ryan discussed what defines a game, what's the definition of a game. So, and at the time, Jeff and Ryan looked at it from like a game enthusiast's point of view. Jeff and I decided to look back on it, but now Jeff teaches game design at NYU. I've done my share of teaching game design as well. So I think what we both did is we looked at it from a much more analytical point of view, looking at existing definitions of games from various people around game design and quoting some better study text. So we were much more read up on the subject, and we were able to take advantage of thought that had already been established in there. And having done that, we didn't come to a definitive answer, which goes to show how squirrely the subject of what a game actually is, which is really why we wanted to do the episode in the first place, because it's one of those things that sounds really simple and straightforward. Oh, I know what a game is, but when you try to define it, it really gets very elusive, you know? The most recent episode we did was about ties, and it seems like, well, what can you talk about ties? A tie's a tie, but it starts getting into the question of what does winning mean? What does winning a game mean? Okay. So, like, for example, let's say you have a game where you have a shared victory, like Cosmic Encounter. Is that a tie, or did both players win in their own right? There are games like Cockroach Poker where only one player loses and the rest of the players win. What does that mean? You know, does that mean it's a three-way tie? Like, what is the game trying to tell us by saying, well, everybody wins but this one player?
This is super deep and analytical, and things that you really, really get. Well, they get incredibly interesting when you start to really think and consider them.
Yeah, especially people like us who play a ton of games, you know, who are swimming in this. You know, we when you start looking at this, you know, because it's not like we just, you know, play a game a month and that's it. You know, we're playing games very, very frequently. I'm sure you two play games a ton. You know, and so you know, you get this very almost intuitive understanding of what a game is and what games do. But once you start putting it into words,
verbalize it or put a definition on it,
you know, it starts to get really interesting because it forces you to think critically about it, and it's not something we're used to doing, and it leads to insights that, for me, they help me with my game designs because they start focusing what I should be doing when I'm making a game. Like, how should I be incentivizing players to act? You know, should I be? What is the interesting part of the game I'm making, and how do I follow it? You know, how do I pull all the other stuff away and leave only the stuff that people are really interested in? You know, games with a very clear focus, I think, are games that people really, really tend to enjoy, where there isn't anything in the way to distract it, like not some other mechanism that's incentivizing them to do something that's boring. Like, you know, if you pass 3 times in a row, that's really good, but now you're disengaging with the game 3 turns in a row. Do you really want to do that as a designer? Things like that, you know, little traps that you can get caught in.
So clever.
Yeah. Well, it's something that I think really helps. So that's what Ludology is all about, and
that's very cool.
Yeah.
I have a question down that same vein.
Sure.
A couple of days ago, I put out a call on our Discord channel asking our viewers for any questions they would like us to ask.
Okay.
To our interviewees, and they said for game designers, they're super curious what mechanic what mechanic did you really enjoy that you've never actually used in one of your games?
Well, I'll start with my default answer that, like, I don't always look at mechanisms. I don't always start with mechanisms with games, just because I like looking at. I want to take a step back, and this is something I hear from a lot of designers these days, but I like to step back and look at the overall experience as a game designer and say, how do I want my players to feel? Do I want them to feel frantic? Do I want them to feel, want the game to feel humorous? Do I want them to be entertained? Or do I want them to be really tense and nervous? And the games can result in all sorts of emotions. And once I get that penned down, I find that it's a lot easier to work towards that. So to me, mechanisms are more of a means to an end. So I have a harder time saying, like, just taking a mechanism in isolation, being like, okay, that is something. You know, so, you know, there was when deck building came out, you know, number one, I said, well, I don't know if I want to do a deck building game, but if I do, it would be fantastic to have a game that's almost like, have you ever played Rows and Boats, the Splotter game?
No.
It's this, it's about, I'd say about 3 or 4 hour economic game where you literally start the game with, I'm serious, with like, I think a cart and 2 geese. And by the end of the game, you have a multinational bank, So you're sort of building this economy from nothing.
Really cool.
It's almost like an economic version of Katamari, because you're just growing and growing and growing. And I would love to see a deck builder with that sort of scope, where you start the game with very, very little, and the cards you get in, start growing and growing and growing. But the reason I'm talking, it's not just that I want to see like a deck building game, because deck building games are everywhere. You trip over them these days. But a deck building game that provides that experience, that snowballs and snowballs and snowballs, that's something that I'd like to see. So I have a hard time like separating the experience from the mechanism, because I really want to design for the experience, and the mechanism is just what I use to go towards that.
I've never heard someone describe game design that way, where it's about the experience and then the means to that end. That's really, really interesting.
I think it's a useful way, and I'm hearing more designers start looking at game design that way, and I think that's really helping our craft. I think that's one of the reasons. Honestly, I think games are getting better these days, and it's really affecting the industry, because while people complain about all these new crappy games on Kickstarter, they're not very good. But I don't think that's our pressing problem right now. I think our pressing problem is there's too many games, period. There's just so many games, both good and bad. I mean, there's a lot of amazing games that fall under the radar because
market saturation.
Yeah, and lack of discoverability. Both, they go hand in hand. So not only are we saturated, it's really hard to come across these new games. So that's it's a tricky thing. And as we get better as game designers and start looking at the craft, from a more analytical point of view, and the game design, the craft starts to improve. Obviously, like you have to be careful, because while it's cool to look at games analytically, you still need that spark. You still need that flash. And no amount of analysis can provide that flash. You can do it by the numbers, by the book, and finish with a really solid game. But the game needs that pizzazz. Yeah, exactly. It needs that soul. So that's the magic thing, and I don't think anybody's ever really going to be able to quantify that, and that's why it's always going to be that. But that said, there's so many games, even with soul, that get sort of like lost in the shuffle.
With the market saturation and the lack of discoverability, how do you differentiate your games on Kickstarter so that you're able to? I mean, obviously Formal Ferret has their own following, and you've built your own audience. Is that what you rely on when you use Kickstarter to be the venue? I
mean, that's a lot of it. One of the things you have to do with Kickstarter is if you're looking for reviews and marketing on the first day of your Kickstarter, you've already failed. You have to start early. You have to start months in advance talking about your game, showing your game. Don't be shy, don't be secretive. If you're a small designer publisher like me, you have to start early and get the game in front of as many people as possible, get them talking about it as soon as possible, and that's your for me, that's my best strategy of working with it. I was lucky in that even when I did Bad Medicine, my first Kickstarter, I'd already had 2 games published by other publishers, so I already had a bit of a head start, and I already had a bit of a following. Not everybody's going to have that luxury, so it's just a matter of hustling. When I say hustling, I don't mean like basketball cheating people. I mean like working, like right. Really showing up, going to the shows, meeting people. It's funny. I talked to J.R. Honeycutt, right? You guys, of course, J.R. Honeycutt. Everyone knows J.R. Honeycutt. And so J.R. talks about. J.R. is one of the best people at networking that I know about, just like having connections and knowing people, and yet he hates the term networking. He insists that he does not network. When asked how he got his start in the game business, he said, "Well, I just gave hugs to as many people as I could." Oh. And at some point, somebody said, "Hey, wow, you give really good hugs. Can you do anything else?" He's like, "Yeah, once in a while I can make a game." So he says that's how he got his start in the game business. But seriously, that really, I mean, he's just really personable, really easy to get along with, really easy to talk to. And to him, he doesn't network. He just hangs out with friends. Like that's for him, that's his perspective.
I feel like the term network has such a intimidating connotation to it that looking at it that way makes it so much easier to kind of swallow the act of increasing your social circle or increasing the people you know. And a lot of the game designers that I've talked to, I was just talking to Chris who designed Lanterns, and I asked him for his top. Actually, before I tell you what he said, what would you consider to be your top 3 pieces of advice for new game designers?
Okay, well, the first one is the really clear and obvious one, which is playtest. Playtest. And when you're done, playtest some more.
That's Chris's number 1?
Yes, that's because Chris is a really smart guy. That should be everybody's, and that's why Chris makes great games. That's why he makes games like Lanterns, because he knows that, your game isn't going to get better because you're thinking about it and stewing on it. You're getting it to the table, you're getting people to play it, and you're seeing how it works right in front of you. And there's nothing better than that. And you don't just play test with the same group. You play test with a wide variety of people, see a wide variety of play styles, because you test with the same group and you think you have it ready, and then you play test with a new group and they do something you never even thought was possible, and that usually doesn't end well. So that's the first piece of advice I have, is play test. Second piece of advice is don't overvalue your idea. Don't think that your idea is this amazing thing and that needs to be coddled and protected. Your idea can change. Your idea needs to get worked over and beaten up, like the main character in a noir film. You got to send it down the dark alleys and get it beaten to a pulp in order for it to win in the end. So you don't owe your idea anything. And let's say you have a game that's based on this idea you had, and all the feedback is pulling you away from the idea to the point that everybody's telling you the game would be better without the thing that sparked you to do that game in the first place. Some designers say, well, what do? And I say, cut it. The idea was the scaffold, scaffolding. You needed it to build it. Now it served its purpose. Get it out. The important thing is making the game good. You don't owe your ideas anything. Don't overvalue your ideas. By that same token, don't hide your ideas. Don't worry about people stealing your ideas, because the only times I've ever seen IP theft happen in the industry, they happen with published games that have been reprinted, because if someone's going to steal a game, they're going to steal something that has a proven track record, not something that's in somebody's head.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So that's the second thing, is do not overvalue your idea. And the third thing is, it is actually something that I was going to mention when you were talking about JR. It reminded me something Jamie Stegmaier pointed out also, which is in terms of networking, in terms of marketing, the business is still small enough that you can market just by being a good citizen. One great way of marketing is just sitting down and playing somebody else's prototype and giving them honest feedback. That is another way a really good way to market, is just to meet people and say hi and talk to them, and not push your game, not say, oh, hi, have you heard about my game, but just mingle, and talk to people and get out there, and that is, the business is still small enough that is a really great way of marketing. And you don't have to force your game into the conversation. It's just going to come
naturally.
It's just going to come up, So you show up, you do your work, and you meet people and you listen. You don't just talk, but you listen and you help them. I remember that I went to a protospiel, and there's this fella who was showing me his game about bidding on storage units, and I played his game. I gave him honest feedback. I thought it was a really cool game, and I gave him a bunch of good feedback. Then he played my game. It was the expansion of Battle Merchant at the time. What I didn't know is he was also working on this apocalyptic survival game called Dead of Winter. And so John Gilmore still, he said that I was the first person in the business to really sit down and play with him. And you never know where it's going to lead. He's one of the best citizens in the business at this point. John is just amazing. He's one of the friendliest and most down-to-earth people I've ever met, and having people like him in the business is really a blessing. So that's really, our business is still small enough that people like John, people like JR, people like Chris Chung, all these people, they go far because they can be themselves, they can sit down, they can be honest, and they don't have to rip anyone off, they don't have to go for the jugular. A rising tide still floats all boats, and the business is still small enough that we can do that. Help each other, and you help yourself.
That's incredible. I absolutely love hearing that message being repeated throughout this industry. It makes me feel so good to be a part of an industry that's happy and kind and helpful, and everybody's got kind of the same goal.
I worry about the day that we get our Bill Gates, because you know that story, right? That Bill Gates took all this free software and then he started charging for it, and then that was the start of Microsoft, and this business that had built this hobby, this not even industry but a little hobby that had grown off of camaraderie and sharing your work suddenly became siloed and all about profiteering, and maybe board games will wind up heading in that direction if we get big enough, and I hope that day doesn't come. I mean, I would almost rather, we hit a ceiling and stay friendly and collegial and still be able to, eke out livings.
Right.
Rather than being able to rake in millions, but now
and keep the smaller ones down.
Yeah. Now there's vipers and sharks and film producers, in the business. That's one of my big fears.
I like to ask experienced game designers, during your career, can you tell, I feel like people learn a lot from other people's mistakes.
Oh yeah.
Can you, not to pick, but can you tell me one time maybe that you made a mistake, or there was a goof up, or there was something that didn't go the way you had expected it to go, and what you learned from it, or what you wish you had known at that time?
Oh geez, I'm trying to think of something that isn't too inside baseball. Do you mind if I it's in order to say it, I might have to babble a bit about distribution and stuff like that, because a lot of the lessons learned wind up being these real nitty gritty things,
Okay.
I wish it could be just simple platitudes, but I mean there's little things like when you go to a convention and you're loading in, bring a cart. Thankfully, I knew to bring carts and dollies, but I've seen people new to conventions being like, "Do you have a cart? We didn't bring one." Things like. Here's one that I learned. My very first Origins, I charged. I did the thing where you deducted a penny from the price, so I deducted a nickel, so my games were $49.95, and I thought that was really cool.
Okay.
And when I gave people their change, I wasn't expecting to see almost the anger on their faces. They waited for me to give them their nickel. No, when you charge prices at a convention, you round it off. You take their $20 or $50 or whatever you're charging for the game. Just take the bill. They're happy. You're happy. There is no need to mess with any of that. So that was another thing. Let's use that rather than having to babble dryly about boring subjects of distribution, because that's I don't think that makes for great TV.
You don't feel that distribution is an exhilarating and
I think distributors do. And honestly, as a publisher, I find it really interesting, but I'm going to be droning for another 20 minutes now. We don't want that.
Is there anything that we didn't think to mention that you'd like to talk about?
The really big things I wanted to mention were Wordsy and the network's executives. Those are the really two big things. Other than that, how about you two? Are you having a good show?
We're having a great
this
show.
is our first Origins.
Yeah.
I'm having a really great time. I really like Columbus. I absolutely love the setup for Origins. I like that there's a big half exhibitor hall and a big half free playtest area.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's Gen Con is similar, where you have the big vendor hall, except with Gen Con, everything is 3 times the size, so it's even bigger. But Gen Con is sort of the same thing, and I think with Gen Con, the open play area, the event hall, stays open 24 hours, which is really cool. Origins closes, I think, 1 a.m. So that's a really cool thing about Gen Con. But yeah, it's a really nice thing. Did you get to see any of the Pride Parade today?
Just a glimpse.
Yeah, in the morning.
I was walking down the Skywalk and I snapped a few photos.
Did you?
Yeah.
You'll have to share them. I'd love to see what it looked like.
Just a couple of quick photos. They're not very good, but it looked like an awesome event. Now, disclaimer, I don't really like crowds, So, I was very glad to be on the Skywalk by myself, But that said, it seemed like an awesome event. And, I think Columbus has a lot to be proud of, with an event like that. Yeah.
It's really cool that this weekend is housing 2 completely separate but very very wonderful communities that are just coming together.
I love seeing that intermingling, right? So sometimes at Gen Con, if depending on when it gets held, there's like a Colts game that some Colts fans cut through the convention center to get to the stadium because the stadium's right there, and you get to see photos of people wearing Colt jerseys, with their arms around like this Halo warrior or this anime person dressed as an anime character. It's hilarious.
It's great.
Just
fantastic.
seeing the communities intermingle positively, is really, really cool.
Absolutely.
Coming into Columbus, it was really cool to see how the city really is celebrating and embracing the parade. Nobody had told me anything yet about the parade, but you see all the support in all the business windows on all the houses. There was also, what I thought was really cool, there are a couple of houses around with front yard signs. And I want to say like the top third is in Arabic, the second third is in English, and the bottom third is in a different language. And the message was, no matter where you're from, I'm so happy that you're my neighbor.
It's really cool.
It's like, that's so cool. How
yeah.
nice and friendly and kind and welcoming that is.
Yeah, I really like it. Columbus is a really neat town, and I really like coming here. And also Jenny's ice cream.
Of course.
Jenny's ice cream.
Finally went.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
It's amazing.
It's really good stuff. So yeah, overall, it's a fun city to visit for a variety of reasons.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is a
course.
blast. Thanks to both of you.
And
Thank you.
definitely back the networks, the sequel, the
The
extension.
Networks Executives on Kickstarter in August.
Fantastic. And I hope you share the link with us and we can share it out to all of our viewers.
I will know the link in August.
At the
You knew
time.
that. You knew that.
Of course,
you knew that.
at the time we'll be happy
You
to
can
share
hit me.
that.
Are you a righty? If you're a righty, you got your strong hand.
We're good. I'll just have to hit you with Romeo. So thank you so much again.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.